break it down!
Hello, this is Chris Pratt from Eurogamer, and let's talk about Blizzard's latest. It's called Overwatch, and it's a multiplayer first-person shooter in which you can, yes, control a character like this with an assault rifle and the ability to sprint. He's actually quite a bit more interesting than I've just made him sound, but this is maybe what you're expecting from the genre. Fair enough, but that's not likely to be true for the other 20 characters in the roster, and that is perhaps the game's greatest strength, the variety of playstyle. I'm sure many of you have already made the link between Overwatch and Team Fortress 2. Hell, one of the two game modes currently running in the closed beta is just straight up called Payload. But when it comes to the heroes themselves, these characters, there's an easier comparison to be found with the MOBA genre. Once again, some inspirations are more blatant than others.
Fresh meat.
So, right, anyway, there are 4 roles to choose from when jumping into a match: offensive, defensive, tank, and support. But within those 4 roles, the heroes themselves function very differently. The way they move around the map, for a start. Soldier 76, who we mentioned at the beginning, happens to be the only character that can sprint. Likewise, Genji is the only character with a double jump. He can also climb walls vertically like this, as can Hanzo, whereas Widowmaker, well, she's got a grappling hook, and if you know what you're doing, you can also use Lucio's wall running ability to steadily climb upwards. Pharah can jump jet into the air and then hover, whereas D.Va can use her boost to fly for a few seconds at a time. Winston can leap, and McCree can roll. Mercy pulls herself towards allies, and Reaper teleports to pretty much anywhere that's in his line of sight. Overwatch is a game all about this feeling of individuality. Every character is different, and a big part of being a good player comes down to getting a handle for which will work in your current situation. Generally speaking, I found that most teams tend to aim for a relatively balanced setup, and what that means changes depending on the game mode that you're playing and whether or not you're attacking or defending, but it's usually a good idea to have, say, at least 1 tank and 1 support, and a nice mix of damage dealers that can function at different ranges. That's actually kind of an important point to remember. Say you decide to play as Widowmaker, a character very clearly suited to long-range encounters. Yes, she's a great pick for defending objectives, but I found her especially vulnerable to characters like Tracer or Genji, those heroes that specialise at getting behind the enemy lines and dealing damage at closer ranges. Every character has a counter, and so if you do pick Widowmaker, you're relying on your other teammates to have your back, and this layer of strategy has become one of my favourite aspects of the game, and unlike League or Dota 2, interestingly, you're not locked into your selection for the entire game. In fact, at any point you can switch heroes, either by returning to your team spawn, or more likely, to be honest, when you've just been killed by a character you're not quite equipped to deal with. Now, there is a cost associated with that decision, the most obvious one being that switching heroes loses any progress that you've made towards filling up your ultimate meter, which is this percentage down here, right at the bottom. Reaching 100% allows your character to use their biggest, flashiest ability, ranging from a team-wide resurrect to jumping out of that mech that you've been riding around in and setting it to self-destruct. You won't see many of these in a game. You can usually count the number of ultimates that you've triggered on a single hand, and they can be incredibly important, but really this is a relatively small sacrifice to pay if you're struggling to get a foothold in a game. It's strange, when I first started playing I didn't care much for this idea at all. I found the number of heroes a little bit intimidating as it was, and I much preferred the thought of specialising with a few select characters that match my playstyle. That's how I played Dota 2, and damn it, that's how I play Overwatch as well, and I guess I got away with that for a little while, but there was a very clear moment when that stopped making sense. You see, back in the first week or so of the beta, you'd find that almost every defending team would include a Bastion, which is this, a rather slow and cumbersome robot equipped with what is a fairly unremarkable submachine gun. But the thing is, a player controlling Bastion won't usually want to fight like this. Instead, they'll be looking for a decent spot with nice line of sight to set up with their hero's sentry mode, which turns them into this kind of stationary but very powerful turret, protected from most frontal attacks with its own shield. And yeah, a well-positioned Bastion overlooking a choke point or a game objective can just tear through an opposing team, racking up multi-kills and generally upsetting everyone involved. And this seemed to happen game after game to begin with, until eventually players learned how to counter it. If there is a Bastion guarding the point you need to capture, you have someone on your team switch out to a Reaper, whose temporary invulnerability lets them face a nearby Bastion head-on and just basically fly directly through the player's shield. Or maybe a Junkrat, who can drop grenades just past that shield and damage them all the same, or a Symmetra, who can line up a few charged attacks which pass right through it, and you either force them to move or they die. There are always options, and players in the beta are starting to get a feel for this. Bastion has gone from being probably one of the most played heroes I'd encounter to perhaps one of the least. Now, of course, I'm not saying Overwatch is immune to balance issues, and perhaps Bastion does need to be changed up somehow. That will become clearer over the weeks and months to come, but I just really like how this seemed to resolve itself. If it weren't possible to switch heroes mid-game, we might still have an issue. At the very least, it would mean that team setups would sort of have to include a Bastion counter as default. And that doesn't sound like a fun solution. So there we are. I think I was always going to enjoy Overwatch thanks to the sheer breadth of playable characters. But I'm surprised to find that it's this option to switch between them on the fly that's really sold me on the game as a whole. I'm even starting to look at games that don't let you switch between characters and sort of thinking, well, why not? Which is not where I expected to be after just a couple of weeks with the beta. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, do let us know with a like or a comment, because I'm very eager to return to Overwatch if you'd like to see more from it. It's pretty good. Run away, run away, run away, the self-destruct can kill me. I think I just did it. I just won us the game. Self-destruct. Oh, feeling really tremendously happy about that. And last but not least, we've got Mei. Mei was my favourite of the 3 characters that have been introduced easily, and I think that's because I'm a huge fan of her Ice Wall ability in particular. You can block off entire routes that the enemy wants to use, you can provide cover, even if it's destructible cover. That's really useful. Pretty sure I ruined a Widowmaker's game using this character. Every time they popped up to take some shots at my team, an Ice Wall would appear in front of them, and they didn't really know how to cope with that.